Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and joining us here tonight in the studio, we're joined by Dr. Sherine Ramadan, the Human Capital Development Consultant. Dr. Ramadan, thank you very much for joining us.
You're most welcome, Hani. It's my pleasure.
Dr. Ramadan, now talking about the Decent Life Initiative, talking about trying to raise the standards of living for the Egyptian citizens. Now, the President has recently made the decision to raise the minimum wage of civil servants to £2,700. That's an increase about 13%, including other incentives, amounting to $172. Now, how do you view such a decision, and what sort of effect do you think it will have on the Egyptian citizen and on the whole economy in general?
Right. Well, I would say one of the major elements of the state's vision, the Egyptian state's vision, in the previous years and in this year specifically, is to raise the standard of living for all Egyptians and to achieve a decent life and dignity for all Egyptians. The minimum wage laws actually has started since 2019. It was 2,000, and then it was raised last year to 2,400, and this year it's been rising again to 2,700 pounds, which shows how significant it is for the state raising the standard of living for Egyptians. We have 30 million Egyptian workers, whether in the private sector or in the public sector. 6 million citizens work in the public sector. And this minimum wage is going to be for the public sector, and also we are last year we were trying to enforce the law of 2,400 Egyptian pounds as a minimum wage for even the private sector. You have also, plus the 2,700 as a minimum wage, basic wage, you have two bonuses amounting to 18 billion. I mean, the amount of the two bonuses will cost the government 18 billion pounds. And the first bonus will be given to those who are addressed by the civil service law. And the second, which is going to be 7%. The second bonus will be 13%, and it's going to be for those who are not addressed by the civil service law. And this is because the people who were not addressed by the civil service law were not subjected to other bonuses and raises that were happening in the past. So it definitely shows how the state is really concerned of raising the standard of living for Egyptians, especially with the rising prices and the pandemic and everything else.
Yes. Well, and does that also include the pensions and the pensioners?
Well, no, that's not for the pensioners. This is for the people who are already in service, who are already the Egyptian workers, whether in the private sector or in the public sector.
Yes. Well, you spoke of the inflation and the soaring prices. Now, how can the government try and balance between raising the minimum wage and at the same time the pace of the soaring prices and the inflation? How can you actually try and find some sort of a balance so it is satisfactory for both the citizens, the workers, and also the investors and the producers?
It is it's a very difficult task. You know, the inflation has been a problem that is being faced by the whole world, especially after the pandemic. And it's a financial situation that is being handled by central banks and by governments. In order to close the gap completely between the prices and between the incomes of people is quite difficult, and governments are working on that. But the first step is, when we're talking raising the minimum wages. You know, the minimum wage is the lowest wage that is allowed to be paid by any organization, whether public or private, in the country. It's basically meant for blue collars and for people who are at the very entry level of their career. So it's just basically to try and close the gap a little bit between the people in society, to try to achieve equality a little bit, because when you start at a wage that is below the minimum wage, which cannot even sustain a decent life for you, even if you're an entry level or even if you're a worker or a blue collar, make it very difficult to reach the point where you can raise your salary to become in the middle class and to try to develop yourself in the future. So having the minimum wages, which is, as I mentioned, the lowest wage that is allowed to be paid to any worker, no matter what their job is, makes it kind of like a stepping stone, or like the first step towards kind of bridging the gaps between levels of society.
Yes. Well, Dr. Ramadan, you're an expert in human capital development. Now, this decision to raise the minimum wage to £2,700, what sort of effect did it have over the past week or so on the human capital that you've been dealing with?
Right. Well, this initiative is being discussed and it's going to be effective in next July. 2022. What we are working on now is actually still enforcing the 2.4, which is 2,400 Egyptian pounds monthly minimum lowest wage. And the government is still discussing with, some organizations have had petitions that they're not able to fulfill this, and they have these things are still being discussed. That's why by the time the new fiscal year, the new budget comes out in July, and we start enforcing the 2.7, we would be finished with enforcing the 2.4. To find, to find the actual effect on human capital, I believe it's very difficult to tell, because as I mentioned, it's still going to be enforced in July. This is the first step. The second step is this, as I mentioned, the lowest wage. It's going to it's for people who are still being hired, who are entry level, like fresh graduates. Definitely it will have a huge impact on the workers level, on the blue collars, because as I mentioned, if we look at the private sector, for example, when you look at the very, very first entry level of white collars employees and workers, you'll find a huge gap between even the lowest white collar and the workers in the blue collars.
Yes.
And that's closing and bridging this gap was very important, because there was a huge gap. People were not even able to sustain a suitable, decent life with their income. And this command has a huge impact on, the loyalty of the employees to their workplace, and their productivity and their continuity, and their even eagerness to learn, eagerness to develop themselves. So it definitely have a huge impact in this area.
Does it also have an impact on the workplace? Does it have an impact on the institutions, on the NGOs, on the public sector, the private sector? Does it have some sort of an effect on the institutions and the workplace?
Of course. Well, let's say what we want to achieve eventually is a positive effect, which is the loyalty of the employees, which will then reflect on their productivity and their eagerness to give more, to develop themselves, which will reflect on the organization, of course. But this change will definitely have a kind of a burden on the organizations and even on the government, the public sector. Because as I mentioned, the bonuses alone is £18 billion. Having to raise the minimum income, that's why we are still in the process of discussing our new budget for 2022-23, because you have to discuss your debt burden, you have to discuss your investments, and that's also why we have been doing all these investments in all these mega projects that willing to try and have the enough income or the enough resources to be able to finance this. So it is going to be a burden on organizations to be able to fulfill that. But on the other hand, it will reflect on the productivity of the organization. So it's going to take a little bit of time until this balance, we reach this balance.
Well, the Decent Life Initiative works on many aspects of improving many aspects of life for the Egyptians. Now, one of those aspects is the housing aspect, and there's been a lot of effort exerted in developing the housing sector, and now payments can be extended for over 30 years, which is the first time in Egyptian history.
Yes, yes.
Now, what does this do for not just the Egyptian citizen, but the planning of life? Because 30 years is a lifetime, and it creates some sort of a favorable amount of payment over 30 years.
Well, allow me first to say that we have been always mentioning our human capital. We are over 100 million, around 102 million citizens. And when we are utilizing this amount of citizens, this amount of population, to try and make them productive, to try and develop our country and our economy, that can make us go forward. If we don't do that, they will be a burden, or we will be a burden on our country. So we are mentioning that we need to develop and we need to utilize our human capital to the maximum and to the most. But we cannot do that by asking our citizens to be productive when they don't have the basics of life. The basics of life, which is health, decent accommodation, decent education, decent living, decent standard of living in general. So even, there is now we're talking about the residential projects. So this is one of the steps. Allow me first to say the Decent Life Initiative started in 2019 as an initiative by the President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, and then it became a national project in 2021-22. And it has four major aspects. The first aspect is developing and enhancing all the infrastructural services, the quality of all the infrastructural services. The second thing is building the Egyptian citizen, which is kind of the major part that we're talking about. Building the Egyptian citizen in terms of health, in terms of education, in terms of housing, as we mentioned, even youth, taking care of the sports and youth centers and cultural centers, and so taking care of the body, the mind, and the dignity of the Egyptian person. And the third part is the social part, and the fourth part is the economic development, which is going to be a result for the whole project. So the housing part is part of the social services that we try to give the Egyptian citizen. Is if you don't live in a decent place, if you don't have a decent place to live, you won't be able to go to work and become productive. And as we all know, that it's very difficult for youth to be able to buy flats, and even rent with the minimum wages at the start of their career is very difficult. So having this initiative, it definitely changes, especially that you're giving them a decent housing units and decent residential units. It will definitely make a huge difference in the paradigm of the Egyptian person. They will be brought up in decent, clean places, affordable. It will change their dignity. It will make them feel good about themselves, make them even patriotic more. They will love their country more. They will be able to, the loyalty for their country. It's so different from them living in very poor life conditions, which result in poor health conditions, etc., etc.
Well, some of these aspects of the Decent Life Initiative, as you've mentioned, were the basic needs, the housing, the residential areas, the sanitation, the infrastructure. Now, this initiative was an idea that started off in 2019, so it's a relatively young initiative. How far do you think we've come over those 3 years, for instance, in this initiative?
Huge progress. Allow me first to speak about the infrastructural projects or programs that has been happening. We have 3 major areas, or maybe 4 major areas, that were a problem in the villages of Egypt. The sewage, no natural gas, even water supply. It was available, but sometimes available. There's no sustainability in the service. So what happened is the sewage, for example, we have 217 villages only that has sewage facilities, sewage networks. The rest, first of all, the 2017 villages have branches and other lands and stuff that were not planned or not officially planned, around 10,000 places that don't have sewage facilities. And this is according to the Prime Minister. And we have other 1,142 villages that has no sewage. So the plan was, you know how the infrastructure program is been done on phases. We are in phase 1 now, and in phase 1 the plan is to have sewage in 100% of the Egyptian villages, the whole 1,400 villages. So by the end of phase 1, it's going to be done for the whole, for all the Egyptian villages, 100%. We'll be having sewage treatment facilities, new sewage treatment facilities. Allow me to give you some numbers regarding this. Now, 82 of the Egyptian villages has no proper sewage facilities. As I mentioned, 217 villages only has the sewage. So we have 130 sewage treatment plants with a capacity of more than 2 million cubic meters of treatment daily. That's going to be happening by the end of phase 1, which is 22-23.
Yes.
The year 22-23. So this is a huge progress from 2019. Let alone that in 2019 the program was not as vast. It was an initiative to try and enhance the Egyptian villages. But now it's going very rapidly, and so if this is, we're talking sewage only. Let's talk about the water supply. As I mentioned, the water supply is available in all villages, but it's not sustainable, it's not all the time. Now we are going to be adding 51 new water treatment plants. We are going to replace and renew 3,000 kilometers of old pipes, because you know they were old and they need renewal. And this is all phase 1, by the way. This is what all these numbers are phase 1. Natural gas, 4 million housing units are going to have natural gas. We only have 59 out of the 1,413 villages. Only 59 villages has natural gas. By the end of phase 1, 100% will be having, 4 million housing units will be having natural gas.
Yes.
We have 16,000 kilometers of natural gas networks will be installed by the end of phase 1 as well. So as I mentioned, so we have came a long way since in the past 2 years, which is we have been working very rapidly, especially in the infrastructural projects.
Yes. Well, we're seeing a lot of international recognition of the achievements of the Decent Life Initiative and the whole economic process taking place in Egypt. I mean, quite recently meeting with the US delegation from the Senate, also the UN, many foreign countries, many members of the international community are really praising the development and the process taking place in Egypt, especially the Decent Life Initiative. Does this have an effect economically on investments, on financial aid, on developmental cooperation between Egypt and these international institutions or the entities or countries individually?
Of course, because you know any country is being rated economically, is being rated politically based on its performance. They take into account when they rate the country, the rate of stability, the income of individuals, the political situation. They take in consideration all these aspects. And to be honest, you know, of course, in the past there were a lot of developmental projects or programs, but they were kind of separate and not inclusive. It was due to a lot of things, whether due to the political situation, whether due to the economic situation, or the capability of the Egyptian state for the budget having or the ability to achieve these projects. But at the end of the day, all the developmental projects were kind of separated from each other. But what you see here, especially in the Decent Life program, is the inclusive vision of developing Egypt, developing the human being, developing the infrastructure. Well, you know, the country and the citizens, you cannot separate both. The country wants to utilize its citizens, and in order to utilize its citizens, the citizens have to be capable, have to be living a decent life in all aspects. We're still going to talk about health, education, housing, as we mentioned, infrastructural projects, etc.
Yes. Dr. Ramadan, now, as you've mentioned, the Decent Life Initiative and the government is doing a lot to provide infrastructure, sewage systems, natural gas, housing units and residential areas all over the country, whether developing already existing villages or parts of the country, or actually starting new cities and trying to expand the area in Egypt where Egyptians are living. But with your dealings with the human capital, how ready are the Egyptians to take risks and move outside of their comfort zone and venture into a new way of life, into a new place? Are Egyptians as receptive and as risk-taking as the government is intending?
Well, if you think about it, well, the situation calls for change. In the recent years, we have been seeing a lot of youth migrating, whether legally or illegally, trying to find a better standard of living, trying to find better places to live. I know that the Egyptians had this paradigm of having to live next to the delta and, you know, next to the Nile and in the city and everything. But maybe more or less this goes back to the lack of services in the places. You know, people come from the countryside to try and find jobs in Cairo or in Alexandria or wherever. But it's because of the lack of jobs where they are. It's because of the lack of services, or even if there are jobs, the quality of the income they have. And this is one of the things, if we are talking about the distribution or the demography of Egypt, and we have been facing a huge problem of people all coming to the capital, that having the minimum wage is going to contribute also to people not having to commute to get jobs. Because wherever you are, whatever you are doing, wherever you are in whichever government in Cairo, in Egypt, sorry, you will not be having less than the minimum wage even in Cairo. So you won't have to commute all the way to do this. And this will also give you the motive that if there's a new city that has advantages, have decent life, decent housing, decent services, education, health, etc., that you can move there and start a new life.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, talking about having an improved, for instance, health services, the Decent Life Initiative has actually signed a protocol with the university hospitals to provide better services for the most needy bracket citizens. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.
The Decent Life Foundation signed a cooperation protocol on Wednesday with the Supreme Council of University Hospitals to unify efforts of improving health services for rural communities. The protocol was signed by the Minister of Health and Higher Education, Hussam Abdel Ghaffar, and Nada Dumyati, the head of the medical sector of the Decent Life Initiative. It dictates financial support for the project to enhance social protection for the neediest families. It also aims to alleviate the pressure of the pandemic on people in the countryside. According to the protocol, all hospitals and units affiliated with the Supreme Council of University Hospitals will provide free medical services for cases referred by Haya Karima or Decent Life initiative across the country. The protocol also facilitates logistics, volunteers and coordination with town councils. Meanwhile, Decent Life Program Manager at the Ministry of Local Development, Wale Ghadir Karim, said 475 projects worth 1.6 billion Egyptian pounds have been identified as priority ones, as those are markets, public transport stations and firefighting units. She pointed out that 96% of land plots required by the whole initiative have been made available by the concerned government entities. Hence, Decent Life has now acquired about 4,812 land plots and awaits receiving 196 others. The official highlighted that 331 civil service complexes are being introduced through the initiative, so inhabitants of the countryside will not have to travel to cities to procure documents. The budget allocated to the entire initiative is 700 billion Egyptian pounds, and the number of beneficiaries is 58 million people dwelling in 4,500 villages.
أعلن اليوم انطلاق مشروعنا الوطني الأعظم لتنمية الريف المصري حياة كريمة.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, continuing our discussion with Dr. Ramadan. Now, having this Decent Life initiative, signing the protocol with the university hospitals, you've mentioned quite a few times the importance of providing good health and educational services. Now, the health in specific, we've been doing a lot trying to establish a good health insurance system. We started off in Bursaid, and really trying to develop all these hospitals and the medical and health services, especially in light of the pandemic that emerged late 2019. How far do you think we've come, and what is already being done, signing such a protocol? What does it do for the health services?
Right. Well, allow me first to say that you know, Adam Smith mentioned in his book, because the importance of human capital has started in the 18th century. And there's a book by Adam Smith, which is the nature of the wealth of nations, where he mentions the importance of human capital. And what exactly is human capital? Where human capital is the qualifications and the skills and the experience acquired by capacity building and work of people. The assets of this is education, health, skills, intelligence, health, mental health, and physical health. So if I'm asking or requiring to utilize my human capital and have them being productive, etc., they first have to be healthy, mentally healthy and physically healthy. How far did we go with the 100 Life initiatives? And we have, for example, the hepatitis C is officially over. And that's a huge accomplishment, and it's been mentioned that it has It has been a significant effort by the Egyptian state. Also providing medical units in nearly all governments to detect early disease, to check like chronic disease like diabetes, blood pressure, to early detect these disease, because when you detect it early, you can fight it easier. Also for women, there are medical units for women for providing services, whether detecting breast cancer, checking the general health of women. The medical units have been done in all governments, especially for the places that does not have other medical facilities and hospitals, etc. As for the protocol that has been signed by with the Supreme Council of Medical Hospitals, it is definitely very important because it allows the hospitals to treat anyone who has been referred by Decent Lives program for free. Those who are entitled will be treated for free. So now, along with the medical units, you are providing the medical services to all over Egypt, in all governorates, to those entitled who cannot reach the places where the medical facilities are, or who cannot pay for the services required.
Talking also about the education, because you've mentioned how important and integral it is to establish a decent life for the human capital. Now, we've seen a lot of, I mean, the education really deals with the younger sector of the society. And the younger sector is always, they're very ambitious, driven, and they always look or know where to look and what to search for. And we've seen a lot of establishing and inauguration of many universities, specialized in IT, universities all around the country. But there's something that you've mentioned off air, which is another aspect of the decent life, which is not just all the things that we've been talking about, but making sure we have high-speed internet, the fiber networks, all this sort of new age infrastructure, if we may call it, that the government and the Decent Life Initiative is taking care of. Can you shed more light on that?
Yes, of course. Well, as I mentioned, one of the very good aspects of this program is the inclusivity of it all. Is, you know, when we're talking decent lives from all aspects. As we mentioned health, we mentioned education, etc., and also the infrastructural projects. One of the major aspects in the infrastructural quality, the enhancing the quality of infrastructural projects, was renewing all the post offices in Egypt, being able to provide up-to-date services in the whole of Egypt, all governorates. Also providing high-speed internet to all governorates, which is going to be in phase 1 in Decent Lives. Fiber optic cables were going to be spread in all governorates. Also enhancing the coverage of the mobile networks. As I mentioned, you were talking that we are developing and enhancing education, digitalizing the government, the digital transformation of the whole country, not only the governmental services, even education, even and there's of course there's the academic primary, secondary education, and there is the university education, there's the higher education, there's education never stops. But if we're talking about digitalizing the whole of Egypt, we have to have these services available. Because the people in schools will require internet, will require data services, high-speed internet, etc., to be able to perform their education. So this is going to be a major benefit as well for them to be able to, whether it's in, as I mentioned, academic education or further on.
Yes. Dr. Ramadan, just yesterday, the President met with Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli and the concerned ministers, and they were talking about all the developments taking place within all these sectors. And the President actually emphasized the importance of training and the adaptation of the employees to this new way of working, this new digitalization, technological way of working, having to really get on the bandwagon for it. Now, you're a human capital development consultant. How's this process going to take place, and how difficult or easy is it for the human capital to get on with it?
Well, it's been going gradually. It's not going to be as difficult as in the past because we are all exposed to the digital world anyways. I mean, a few years back when you when we started to digitalize, even in the private sector, like some institutions, some banks, etc., when they were acquired by foreign banks and they were trying to digitalize and change everything, it was a huge shock for employees, and it took a lot of resistance. It took a lot of difficulties to familiarize the employees with the new ways of doing things. Now it's going to be a little bit easier, as I mentioned, because we are all exposed to the digital world, as well as the programs that has been made, specifically in the administration capital, for example. There's a huge project about related to taking all the governmental facilities, having them in the new administrative capital, along with the digital transformation of the whole of the government. And there's a huge initiative to try and train employees on the new ways of doing things, on the digital transformation, and how different things will be.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, as Dr. Ramadan has mentioned, the Decent Life Initiative and the development process taking place in Egypt, it's not just an infrastructural one, it's not just services one, but it's also working on developing the Egyptian citizen and his cultural and practical way of living a new life that goes with the new republic. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. But before we go, I'd like to thank my very distinguished guest, Dr. Sherine Ramadan, the Human Capital Development Consultant. Dr. Ramadan, always a pleasure having you with us.
My pleasure, Hani.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for more coming up on Nile International. I'm Hani Saif. Thank you for joining us.
وأنا كل فخر إني بساهم ولو بحاجة بسيطة في مبادرة حياة كريمة.
الحكاية في مصر فكر